On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 2008. We're going to be taking a look at Leonard Cohen, and he's going to be performing Hallelujah. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So I'm just going to edit this in here again. We're going to have an interactive video tonight, as the original video that I uploaded was blocked on copyrights. So as always, click on the link in the description below or the link pinned to the top of the comment section. Watch the performance there and then come back here for the analysis, and I'll see you guys in the comment section. I'm just going to jump in here. As always, the link to this video is going to be in the description below, so you can watch it there without me interrupting it. But this is where it all started. I know that recently I looked at KD Lang's version of Hallelujah, and also had a video on Jeff Buckley, and he did a version of it as well that's very well known. But Leonard Cohen, the original writer, and giving so many people and future generations inspiration to then do covers of this song. And this is something that a lot of people, when they do refer to other versions of Hallelujah, they say, oh, this is for me a better version, or I like this version better than the original. I think when people say that a song is better when somebody else covers it, it's a bit of a contradiction, because the person covering the song wouldn't have had the inspiration or the ability to cover anything in the first place if that original artist hadn't written it. So it was one of those songs that pretty much, when it was first released, flew under everybody's radar, and John Cale then did a version of the song himself that got it a little bit more attention, and that is then the version that inspired Jeff Buckley to do his version. But over the years, hundreds of different artists have covered Hallelujah, and I've mentioned this in the other video that I did on KD Lang's version as well. But it's one of those songs that now has to be one of the most covered songs of all time. So when we're talking about Leonard's vocal delivery here, he's got that conversational quality to it due to the fact that he is singing where he would normally talk within that range. And when we're calling out the notes here, we've got an E2 in there. We're way down in the bass range here. That would be what his voice would be classified as in this performance, his voice type. So he's going from an E2, he does cover an octave, to an E3 as well when we get to the chorus. And this is the other thing, that when he is way down there vocally, he is choosing all of these notes intentionally. He'll sometimes just stay on the same note, repeat that, and then gradually move up in order to give you that light and shade. And in the chorus is when he is getting to that E3. And it's something that you might not necessarily notice, that change in an octave, but when you do try and sing this, you'll realize the richness of tone that Leonard had, and his ability to get way down there to the E2 here. And by the way, that bass vocal range is between E2 and E4. So he sits well within that, and it's really such a comfortable sound to listen to as well, because he's not straining, he's not forcing his voice to do something that it doesn't want to do. It is a great lesson to learn from Leonard about singing, how to use your voice within the range that it is comfortable. And of course you can work at your vocals, you can increase your range, but to begin with, you want to be singing songs that sit within your natural vocal range so that you're not straining and you can get the best tone from your voice. And I think nobody's going to argue with the connection and the tone that Leonard could produce. Leonard was a great example of one of those standalone artists, considering that he moved from poetry into music. So he already had that ability to write at that depth. And when he then applied it with his own musical expression, he was always going to be unique, because he's not trying to copy anybody. And when we're talking about that vocal delivery, it is important to mention that he's hitting pitches here. There is definite melody to the song, as well as when he wants to break off into a more conversational delivery, then he does. Before we jump back into the video, let me just mention the band, because the arrangement here, the way that it's being executed live is faultless. We've got the Webb sisters on backing vocals with Sharon Robinson as well, doing a fantastic job just blending those vocals in the background. We've also got Neil Larson in shot here, about to get into the organ solo, and it is so tastefully played. Basically, the whole band here just add in and take away exactly when they need to, so there's always something interesting going on. Always something that's going to just pique your interest, but not take the limelight. It is really a team effort here in the band, and that is what it is all about. And there we have it. You can't beat an original performance by the songwriter in order to get that connection to the artist. And this whole performance, you can hear the way that the backing vocals just sit in there with an airy tone to sit it behind Leonard's lead vocal. We also had the saxophone coming in towards the tail end of the song. And this is what it is all about, dynamically playing as a band, to just introduce an instrument at the end of the performance in order to just pique your interest, to keep it interesting the whole time. And it is so well executed live because the dynamic range of this whole performance is off the charts. We go from that spoken vocal. There's no way here that Leonard needs to shout into the microphone or do anything like that. If he did, it would lose the intimacy of the performance. And I know that looking here, we've got the full arena, but it just goes to show how intimate he could make a performance so that these people in the arena would just feel like they are all being sung to individually. But another great indication of a great composition is the way that it can inspire other artists, but also it can be interpreted in different ways as well, with the meaning of the song. And one artist will interpret the song in a different way to another artist, and also they will interpret the meaning of the song differently, so it can mean different things to different people. This is what you get from the writing of Leonard Cohen in a musical sense, being able to dive into a composition and the lyrical content of a composition and attribute different meanings to it depending on your own life and your own experiences, but you can find a common ground with the writer. But I do want to cover a little bit of Leonard's history and career in this video. As you guys can understand, it would take years to cover his whole career, so I do my best to summarize. He studied poetry and music at school. He actually taught himself to play the guitar at school as well. And in 1951, when he was at university, he wrote poems. He won competitions as well for doing that, as well as being an award-winning poet later on in his life, as you guys all know. In 1956, he released his first book of poetry, and that was called Let Us Compare Mythologies. And in 1961, he released The Spice Box of Earth, and this was another book of poetry that was massively popular. In 1966, when he was 32 years of age, he'd been writing poetry for a long time. He decided that he wanted to get more into songwriting and more into the music side of things. So the poetry books started to reduce in number, and he had a song called Suzanne, which was covered by Judy Collins, and she had a massive hit with that. She encouraged him to get out there and perform himself, and he did appear on her show in 1966. So he started performing at folk festivals, and he was noticed by John Hammond, who signed him to Columbia Records. And in 1967, he released his debut album, Songs of Leonard Cohen, and that spent over a year in the album charts. It had songs on there that would be covered by multiple artists. In 1969, he released Songs from a Room, and in 1971, his songs were featured in the movie McCabe and Mrs. Miller. In 1970, he toured for the first time across the USA, Canada, Europe. He also played at the Isle of Wight Festival, and in 1972, he was on tour again, and in 1973, he released Leonard Cohen live songs. And around this time as well, he started working with John Lissauer, and they would tour together as well in order to promote the 1974 album, New Skin for the Old Ceremony. In 1975, the first Best Of was released, and that was called The Best of Leonard Cohen. In 1977, Death of a Ladies' Man was released, and this was a slight change in sound. It was co-written and produced by Phil Spector. There was also a book of poetry released of the same name, but just spelt slightly differently with, instead of ladies, Ladies, it was ladies with an apostrophe S at the end. In 1979, he released Recent Songs. He also started to get into the production with co-producing albums, and he supported that album with a major tour. During this period as well, Jennifer Warnes was backing him up on backing vocals throughout the decade of the 70s. In the early 80s, he co-wrote the rock musical film Night Magic, and in 1984 is when he released Various Positions, and this was the album that contained Hallelujah, and on that album, Jennifer Warnes received a full co-vocal credit. He then embarked on his biggest tour to date, and in 1987, Jennifer recorded her own tribute album called Famous Blue Raincoat, and this restored his career in the USA, bringing him back to the forefront. And in 1988, he released I'm Your Man, and followed that with TV appearances as well as going on tour. In the 1990s, he received exposure to a whole new audience because his songs were being used in movies, and one of those was called Pump Up the Volume in 1990, where Everybody Knows was one of those tracks used in that film, but also Exotica, which was a 1994 movie, and in between those dates in 1992, he released The Future, and songs from that album were featured on Natural Born Killers, which was another huge movie. In 1994, he was secluded for 5 years in order to become a monk, and in 1997 was the second best of release, and that's called More Best of Leonard Cohen. In 2001, he released 10 new songs, and that album was a huge hit. He won 4 Canadian Juno Awards for that in 2002, and then in 2004, he released Dear Heather. In 2004, Leonard's daughter thought that his manager, Kelly Lynch, was stealing money from him, so they looked into it, and it turned out that she had paid off one of her credit card bills for $75,000 with Leonard's earnings, and they also found that most of his money that he'd put away for retirement had disappeared, as well as some charitable trust funds that he'd set up. So this had been happening, they found out, as early as 1996, where Kelly had been selling the publishing rights to Leonard's music. So they sued Kelly in court and were awarded $9 million, but unfortunately, Kelly ignored that decision, and I don't have any update on this, so it might be the case that, unfortunately, Leonard's estate and his family could never get their hands on that money. In 2008, he toured Canada and Europe, and we've just seen a performance from the Live in London album that he released in 2009, recorded at the O2 Arena in London, and he toured New Zealand and Australia. He also toured the USA and embarked on a marathon European tour. Unfortunately, during this part of the tour, he collapsed in Spain. He was having some problems, some stomach problems, and it was food poisoning, so he was hospitalized, but he managed to recover, and within 3 days, he was back on stage performing for his 75th birthday. That tour earned a reported $9.5 million, so massively popular. Everyone went out to see Leonard live, and in 2012, he released Old Ideas, and this was a monster album. It got to #1 in many European countries. It made it into the top 10 in the USA, and in that same year, 2012, he embarked on another world tour, which lasted for a year until 2013, and in 2014, he released Popular Problems. In 2016, he released You Want It Darker, and his son, Adam Cohen, received a production credit on that album, and the title track won a Grammy. Sadly, Leonard passed away in 2016 at the age of 82, and he had an album released in 2019 posthumously, and that was called Thanks for the Dance. But it's great to have a look back at Leonard here at the O2 Arena in London. And this is the thing about Leonard as well. He was such a draw. Everyone wanted to see him live because of the way that he could connect to an audience en masse. But thank you guys for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock.